This video will serve as directions for how to do the homework on solubility of some ionic compounds lab follow-up sheet. Now what I have here that you're looking at right now is a copy of part of that lab sheet, and you will see right up there at the top silver nitrate right there, and you'll see hydrochloric acid, and you're supposed to complete the equation. Same thing here. With number 2, you're supposed to complete this equation. Sodium sulfate and barium chloride. And so what we're doing on the other side is completing it just like we have done in prior assignments. I am going to do a complete explanation of number 2. In number 2, I have already written for you barium sulfate, which is this guy right here, and I've indicated a little subscript. This guy right here is a S. That S stands for solid. All right? The solid means that it's going to form a precipitate. That means when you put 2 drops together in your lab, what will happen is you'll see this barium sulfate you've dropped in the sodium sulfate and the barium chloride, and then you're going to see from 2 clear solutions, you're going to see snow in the water. And that snow is going to be the barium sulfate. And that's what we call a precipitate. Now there's going to be something else formed here where we have barium with sulfate taken care of, but we're also going to have to do the sodium, which is switching partners with the barium, and the other partner is our chloride. And the chloride here and the sulfate here are our anions that just switched partners. So we have a complete equation now. Next thing we need to do is this ionic equation after we balance. We got to balance everything first. So let's get rid of my little marks. And now that that's all cleared up, let's do a balancing act. For balancing, on the left side here, we see 2 sodiums. On the right side, we only see 1, so we need a coefficient here to make that a 2. Here we have 1 sulfate on the left, and on the right we have 1 sulfate, so that's all balanced. On the left side, we have 1 barium. On the right side, we also have 1 barium. And then the chloride is our last little ion, and that's right there with 2 chlorides. And this guy is 1 in the formula unit, but it has a coefficient out front, so it's going to have 2 as well. Let's go ahead and clear this out now. And now we're ready to write our ionic equation. So the ionic equation is going to look like this. We had 2 sodiums in the sodium sulfate up here. So down here we have to write the sodium ion, which is a 1+, can be written just plain plus, because there's only 1 of them. But there's actually 2 sodiums. You see the subscript now is going to become a coefficient in our ionic equation. The next thing that we have is a sulfate ion, SO4, and that has a 2- charge. You notice in the ionic equation, we're writing everything as ions. And then the next thing we have is barium, and that barium is a 2+ ion, and there's only 1 of him, so there's no coefficient. And the chloride that was with the barium, instead of writing it Cl with a subscript, we write it Cl with a coefficient, and that coefficient is 2. Now, when we go to the other side of the equation, you can see I'm going to run into the other columns. You won't have a problem with that because I'm writing bigger here on this board. At any rate, the other side of the equation, we have to start with the barium sulfate, which was a solid, and you'll notice that is not written as ions because it doesn't dissolve in water. And ions are always dissolved in water. So that barium sulfate just goes as is. Next, we have 2 sodium ions, and 2 chloride ions. Now, because we are writing a net ionic equation as our next thing, we want to get rid of everything that has the same ion and the same quantity on 2 sides of the equation. So let's start with our sodium. We see 2 sodiums here on the left. We see 2 sodiums here on the right. We're not going to use them. Okay? We see a sulfate on the left, but the sulfate on the right is part of a molecule that is a solid, and so we're going to have to bring this guy down, even though he's on both sides. On the right side, he's not an ion, so he's a different kind of dude. Okay, who's going to be our next guy on the left? What about barium? Does barium stay? This guy here, the ion? Yes, he stays, because he's on the right side involved in our little molecule. So on the arrow, our next side is going to be barium sulfate. The solid is always going to be part of the right side, or the products. And so our barium sulfate is there. How about the sodium? Sodium doesn't get written. So we essentially, for purposes of the net ionic equation, get rid of him. And you'll notice that the chloride is on both sides as an ion. We see him here, and we see him here. So what we have now is we've gotten rid of our chloride ions. We've gotten rid of our sodium ions because they do not participate in the actual reaction. And so these guys are called spectator ions. Spectators, just like spectators at a football game. There's a lot of spectators, but there's only a small number of players on the field. So our net ionic equation is now complete. I've just given you the complete answer for the second one on your sheet. You are going to figure out the rest of them. And this guy up here, don't do this. Okay, this column, you're going to have to get that after you do the lab. Last year I used this little thing after the lab, and we already had the results. This year I'm using it before the lab. So here you have it. That is how that works, but you're also going to need to know some information, because we haven't worked with the solubility chart yet, and you won't know unless you have it shown to you that silver chloride, see the first guy up here? This guy is a solid. 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 But there are no solids going to be formed in the last equation. So you know that your solids are going to be written on the right side, not as ions, but as molecules. And any ions that aren't part of the solid will not be written in the net ionic equation, but they will be written in the complete ionic equation, this guy right here. Okay? So you should be set. You're going to be doing, let's go back to the other slide. You are going to be doing class, this class column. This, if you'll look at the bottom of your sheet, it tells you is classification. Now this is the third or fourth assignment now that you've had to do classification of reactions. And I think you'll find the classification on these reactions is going to be really easy. So that's it. You should be set and ready to do your homework.